Hello class, this is a video lecture that covers chapter 5 in the book Daytripper. Just a quick refresher on the major themes we can find throughout the book Daytripper. One is the role and nature of family. Especially important in this theme is the role fatherhood and masculinity plays for sons and fathers in the family structure. Two, the role of nature is important, especially the pastoral influence that we will see heavily depicted in this chapter. Third, again, is the concept of death, especially thinking of death as a part that is embedded into life, not as something separate from life. Finally, the idea of truth, how the attempt to find truth in individual moments is more important than constructing a grand narrative about life. So let us start chapter 5. Chapter 5's major theme is the role of nature and the way the pastoral influences of Moon and Ba's book is important to their theme of nature being a place where we can have a more profound connection with family, ourselves, and sort of the world in general. This chapter, chapter 5, is an extended illusion, an extended parallel story that mirrors the Garden of Eden story from the Bible. This emphasis on the Garden of Eden connects heavily to the pastoral concept of the book, and many of the symbols and words and images put forth in this chapter are Edenic. When we say the word Edenic, we're referring back to the Garden of Eden, especially as the Garden of Eden as a place of innocence and peace. And then finally, we will see Bros get cast out of the Garden of Eden into the city, where unfortunately he meets his death. So an illusion, as we said, is when literature will hint at something without directly stating it. So in chapter 5, nowhere does, like Braz's father Benedito, say, "You know what, Braz? This family ranch is like the Garden of Eden. Isn't it wonderful?" Nowhere in there do Moon and Ba have a character come out and tell you what they are doing. But if you follow the clues about the family farm, follow the clues of the structure of the chapter, it is very clear that this is a story that is paralleling the Garden of Eden. We will see Bros go from a completely innocent child, where he only begins to slightly have an understanding of the adult world. Let's start from the very beginning. The Edenic imagery begins right from the jump of the chapter. Right? The chapter begins when Bros was born. We are told that Bros was born, as Bros was being born, there was a blackout, and it was only when he was finally born, when he emerged from his mother, that the lights of the hospital and the city came back on. So Bros's birth literally is the beginning where night is separated from day. If you remember from the beginning of the Bible, God separates dark from light as one of the very first things. And this is how the chapter begins. We literally have Moon and Ba using Braz's birth to separate light from dark. Right? As they say, the light was contagious and stopped the blackout. Next, we see the strong influence of the pastoral and pastoralism that is central to Moon and Ba's understanding of nature. If you look at this panel here, we see the family all in harmony. We see a food and table that is bountiful and plentiful. The ranch gives this family everything they need to survive. And we are just shown a lovely pastoral scene. Pastoral works of literature often draw on Edenic imagery because pastoralism as a genre of literature is used to argue that it is only in nature where we, however imperfect, can regain some of our pre-fall innocence and communal nature, communal relationship to nature. So in pastoral literature, it's by only going out into nature can we regain some of that pre-fall innocence we had back in the Garden of Eden. Now we won't be able to gain it completely, but it's as close as we can get. So the depiction of Bras's family is very pastoral, right? They are living a simple, secure life full of everything they need in a beautiful, natural environment. The Edenic imagery and the Edenic allusions continue when the narrator in the captions on page 114 tells you that everything had a name, even the trees and animals of the ranch. This too should remind you of one of Adam's first tasks in the Garden of Eden, where he would go around naming various objects. And in this ranch, in this Garden of Eden given to you by Moon and Ba, there was one special tree shown here on the pages 114 and 115, where the Father sits and writes words of knowledge. This will reference the famous tree of knowledge from the biblical story. Note the drawing of this tree. This tree will show up later in the book, so this is an important part to notice that. Underneath it, we have Benedetto collecting all of his ideas to write, putting them in order so that the best ones and the most rare ones come out onto the page. So what we have here is the father figure, right? And always remember, father figures are heavily implied and connected to God in various Christian religions. And so he is under the tree of knowledge, writing down very important words and ordering all of his creative existence. So this tree here furthers the Edenic imagery in the chapter by being a tree of knowledge. And it is under this tree of knowledge where, if we could point to any sort of parallel of a fall, where Bras has his fall. Always remember, in the biblical story, the fall of man is an event where man gains sort of self-knowledge and self-understanding. Right? In particular, this is tied to an understanding of sexual identity. If you remember, after eating from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve understand that they are naked and understand their own sexuality. This idea is mirrored in the first kiss of Bras. We are told that under the tree of knowledge, Bras has his first kiss, which is described as pure, sweet, and fast. It also represents Bras going from a child to sort of a preteen or adolescence. He is moving from someone who did not have any of this concept of romantic attraction or any concept of his sexuality to an adolescent who is beginning to discover these elements. It's also important that this moment is described by the narrator as one of those special important moments Benedetto talks about in chapter 3. The narrator says, and no matter what happened, he, Bras, would never forget that moment. So what they are doing is trying to set up the fact that even though Bras in this chapter will live a very short and brief life, it is still a life that had meaning due to special important moments like the one you're shown here. So this moment continues the work of that pastoral Edenic parallel, but then also references the theme that life is made up of individual important moments. So this scene on page 123 is doing work for two themes in the book. But as we know from the Garden of Eden story, eventually man is cast out of the Garden of Eden, so too will Bras. Bras's family return to the city, and Bras describes this as being free. He says that being no longer in the safety and security of the ranch, Bras was now free as a bird. We see the father go downstairs, going away from the son, just as God removed himself or distanced himself from man after the fall of the Garden of Eden. He's no longer protected by the security and safety of the farm. He is now in the world of man, in the city, where we are told the house was no longer able to keep him locked inside. This passage to the city represents, like Adam being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Bras's transition to the adult world, which of course gives him free will. As he says, he is free as a bird. But when Adam and all of humanity was moved from the Garden of Eden, we earned the ability to have free will. We also became mortal. So this passage to the city also represents that he has free will, but also has death. After the fall, humanity was deemed to be mortal. Right? And then this final narration is important. It's one you should focus on. So as we said, one of the sub-themes that we see when Bras has his first kiss is the notion of important moments. So the final narration of Bras at the end of chapter 5 tries to, in some ways, soften the blow of Bras dying so young. The final narration on page 128, Moon and Ba write that Bras's young life in chapter 5 was described as a flame of joy, that it was a candle that burned too fast. So this is a sad death, but it is an attempt to find comfort in a life lived with special moments. Even a life that was brief had special moments. And an attempt to think of that, the little miracle still had a life of miracles. That is Moon and Ba's attempt to try and understand and incorporate death as something that cannot be so harsh. It is an attempt to move away from thinking of death as causing a life that is left unlived, and instead focusing on how death can reveal to us the special important moments of anyone's life. So they are trying in some ways to incorporate their theory and idea of death by focusing on what happens if someone dies prematurely. And this would be their attempt to try and find some comfort and apply their notion of death as a part of life, death as something that allows us to see these special moments, to this problem of someone who would die prematurely. So, chapter 5, we have the key theme, which is that split between the role of nature and the way it plays an important space opposed to urban spaces. Chapter 5 is probably the clearest presentation of the pastoral influence that you can see throughout Moon and Ba's book. Right? We have the parallel of the Garden of Eden, right? And then we also have a sub-theme that tries to again build on the idea that life is a series of important and special moments, so that even the briefest of lives can be viewed as having important, valuable, and special moments. Thank you for watching, and we will continue with chapters 6 and 7.